Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl Podcast, a 3-time award-winning show that aims to motivate and inspire you while increasing the amount of female role models in the media, especially in relation to adventure and physical challenges. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. If you're passionate about adventure, challenge and learning from women who have overcome obstacles and achieved remarkable things, then this is the podcast for you. Every Tuesday at 7 a.m, new episodes go live featuring incredible women who share their stories, insights and tips to help you achieve your dreams and goals. You can support the Tough Girl mission by signing up as a patron. Visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl Podcast. Keep listening until the very end as I share more information about what's going on with me with Tough Girl Challenges, give shout outs and recommend other Tough Girl Podcast episodes. More information can be found at toughgirlchallenges.com.
I'm Emma. I'm based in Bristol in the southwest of England, and I'm a full-time primary school teacher and author, writer, and general map and cycling enthusiast.
We probably spoke in June 2021 and your podcast episode came out on September 9th, 2021. And during that episode, we learned more about, your childhood growing up, your relationship with the outdoors, family adventures, exploring Wales on mountain bike, being inspired by your parents, making the transition to solo adventures, bike packing for the first time. You talked about confidence and feeling safe while on the road. And we also talk more about your book. There's a lot of great stuff in the first episode, but we're going to jump back to sort of June, September time, 2021, and just catch up with what's been going on. So you probably had quite a hectic time during 2021 with the press and the promotion, but take us back to that time. What were you doing? How was it for you?
Yeah, well, I think we were chuckling when we were catching up just before recording this about how many years had passed, and almost trying to rack our brains with actually the timeline with COVID and the pandemic and the lockdowns and how much time has passed. But I guess back then I was in the midst of sort of like a publicity run with launching the new book and all the highs and lows and, adrenaline rushes that come with all those sorts of things to do with speaking to people and kind of connecting with new people that I'd not reached out to before. And also pushing myself out of a comfort zone that wasn't to do with cycling and riding. I mean, I'd never spoken to someone on a podcast before. I'd never written articles for magazines and websites before. And I hadn't really perhaps anticipated what it would feel like to put something I'd created out in the public domain and then to, I guess, cope or deal with the reception, which was, really, really positive, but almost not being prepared for sort of that level of, I guess, reaction and people wanting to talk to me about the rides and find out a bit more about the process. And I think it was a huge learning curve, and I'm so glad that I did it. And I guess I enjoyed it enough to go through it a second time with writing Bikepacking Wales.
When did you start thinking about the next book?
Well, I guess the slightly strange thing is probably if I had thought about it in sort of chronological order in terms of how I had ridden some of the rides, Bikepacking Wales probably would have been the first one I wanted to write, but actually it just made more practical sense to do Bikepacking England as a beginning, sort of a start point. I could start, I live in England and the trails were, at least in the southwest, more accessible. And so I had just more routes and more experience of the riding and the sort of areas that I wanted to explore under my belt. So really that sort of took off first, and Bikepacking Wales had to take a back seat. But, it wasn't long before Vertebrit reached out, my publishers, to see whether I'd be keen. And it didn't take very long to persuade me that a second volume could be done quite happily. And I guess the thing with Wales is it's much more compact than England, yet its terrain and its culture and history and landscapes are arguably a lot more cohesive and, I guess, interesting to me possibly than the more sprawling England to the east.
Walk me through sort of your planning and preparation in relation to the idea of creating a book and even just trying to pick the rides? I mean, do you go in with a pretty solid idea of already thinking, yeah, I need this many number of multi-day off-road cycling adventures. I definitely know these ones are going to be involved, but actually I need to explore these other X amount. I mean, and in terms of, I suppose, just time and spending time out there, gathering this knowledge and information, what does that look like? How long does it take?
Of course, a lot to unpack there, but I think probably I'll start with how I approach looking at potential rides. And I guess I could sort of take you back a little bit to my inspiration from what I've read and used in the past growing up. There's the Nick Cotton guidebooks for cycling, which were an inspiration that were on my dad's bookshelf growing up, which he used to plan our own family holidays. And, they're not perhaps what we're used to be looking at now. They're not sort of all flashy with colourful pictures and OS maps, at least not to begin with. The routes were excellent and clearly well thought through. And then I do spend a lot of time reading nature writing and sort of travelogues. And I remember reading In Pursuit of Spring by Edward Thomas and being fascinated with how he could weave the idea of a journey sort of and situate it within more information about the landscape and the stories that were under, I guess, the skin of that area that he was trying to get to know better. And then you've got Roger Deakin and the wonderful new books by Wild Things Publishing and everything coming up by Vertebrate. And so I guess I had quite a lot of literary and more technical guidebooks to sort of draw from in terms of what I wanted to produce. And I knew very much from the beginning that I didn't want to write something that was too clinical and factual, that just gave a sort of turn by turn route analysis. And I really wanted to take my readers on a journey that sort of immersed them as much as I felt when I was riding. I wanted to almost give that back. And so I guess from a sort of practical standpoint, I'd get out my OS maps, paper and electronic ones on my laptop or on the app or my phone, and start poring over the bridleways and byways that sort of crisscross the country. But what I usually try and do is start off with an area that I'm familiar with, that I've ridden, or walked quite significantly in, and then use that to put a route together before perhaps tackling some areas of the country that I'm less familiar with. And I always try to make sure that the routes have something that ties them together, that allows readers to feel like they've gone on a particular adventure that's perhaps encapsulating some particular gem or point of interest that makes Wales so magical. So, for example, some routes focus on castles and other routes look at perhaps a local individual that perhaps played an important part in the history of Wales. Others take riders around like the Welsh slate mines and coal mines and Lincoln, what it must have been like to be a worker there centuries ago. Others focus on, history well in the past with the Neolithic hunter-gatherers and the Romans, and then coming forward a bit with the drovers. And so I guess for me, I want there to be a thematic connection that you feel that you can tap into on a ride that gives it more meaning than just good trails, which I'm also is also a really important thing for me, that it can't for me just be about good riding. A ride has to have a sense of flow, a feeling that you've moved through a landscape and have somehow got to know it a bit better, and hopefully left it a little bit better than how you found it as well.
How did you manage to get the time? You're working full time as a teacher. Like, how did you fit this in? Because obviously, with the first book, you mentioned that, because of COVID, because of the lockdowns, you actually had time available for you. That must have changed when you were writing Bikepacking Wales.
Yeah, absolutely. It was definitely more of a challenge. I think I went in quite naively to the process to thinking, I've written one. It was hard, really hard, and it challenged me in lots of ways other than just the physical toll of being on the trails for, it added up to days and, weeks and weeks really. But I did naively come into it thinking, well, I know how it's like to work with a publisher. I know what sort of photos and how many photos I'm looking for. I know what I need to look out for on the rides and what to record so I can remember a feeling or a bit of information that I learned on the route. Or I keep a diary where I can go back and sort of pick out interactions I had with friendly locals, or, some food I ate or something I saw that took my breath away. And so I guess I was equipped in that way, practically, to have things that made it easier. But I hadn't counted on the fact that trying to write full time outside of the pandemic lockdowns, how much that would mean squeezing in working, in the evenings alongside a busy full-time teaching job. So yeah, it was challenging, but I'm definitely a determined person, who I just in the end had to really be disciplined and plan my time well and map it out in advance with how I was going to meet my deadlines. And Vertebrate were a fabulous publisher to work with. They're relatively small, which means that there's a real personal touch with when you work with whoever's been assigned to you. And there's a lot of back and forth and say that I had with what I wanted to do. And so they were really supportive. But in the end, it just had to be a lot of hard work and a lot of positive affirmations that it would get done, because in the end, I wanted to create something that I was really happy with and proud to, I guess, share. And I guess at the end of the day, the biggest motivation was wanting to put forward routes that I knew people would enjoy. And that was probably the biggest motivator, not wanting to put together a route that would be disappointing. And so I guess in that similar vein, you had the motivation for working hard into the evenings at my desk, but also the similar motivation of when I was actually out on the trails riding through Wales, with the sense of, oh, I've already done 40, 50 really quite challenging hilly miles today. But I can see that bridleway going off into the distance. If I don't have a go at seeing if it's worth including, who knows when I'm going to be back here next. And I'll have to do those 40 miles again to find out. So I'd better knuckle down and do it, which, managed to get the job done, I guess.
18 routes. How many times would you be riding the routes to get the knowledge, going back and forth and,
Of course. Yeah. Well, I guess really, because I don't want to trumpet my own horn, but I guess I really have developed, I guess, a good sense of what makes, at least in my opinion, a satisfying route. And so a lot of, I think, what helped with the recceing of the routes was the planning before I even left the house, being really, well researched, prepared, using OS maps to look for places where I might want to camp, looking for, plan B, plan C if they didn't work out, reading other people's blogs, looking at heat maps on Strava, looking at a really interesting website called Geograph, which people upload photos of certain specific points. So you could see if a particular route looked like it was workable or a trail looked like it was passable. So I guess it was the groundwork which enabled me to have the best chance of success when I was out on the trails. But then again, just like with Bikepacking England, with some of the areas that I hadn't been to before, like for example, I'd never ridden in the Ceredigion Hills, just to the west of the Welsh-English border, near Mold and Chester. That area was completely new to me. And I probably spent the best part of 5-6 days honing and going back and re-riding that route to really get it how I wanted. And ironically, that was even a route that had been created originally. That one wasn't one of my original routes. It was a route that had been set up by a local council called the Triben Trail a number of years ago, but it had fallen into disrepair. No one had known anything about it for the last couple of years, and it was like it was a ghost trail. And so I guess along with the original routes that I put together for the book, there are a couple like this that I wanted to, I guess, resurrect and bring back from obscurity. And so even though a rough trail was sort of mapped out for that one, trying to find an updated modern way to bridge certain sections that didn't work and certain sections that were illogical in terms of a rider going, a certain way that didn't make sense. Even that took a long time. But I guess those were possibly the rides that were more rewarding for me on a personal level, because it meant that before I started riding and writing Bikepacking Wales, I thought I knew Wales. And it turns out that there was a whole lot more that I got to experience, which on a selfish note was wonderful.
In terms of your physicality and wellness, I believe that you were dealing with an injury, which sort of made things a little bit more challenging for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So just, for example, during my book launch, which the lovely folk at Outkit put on for me in Bristol for Bikepacking Wales, about this time last year, even when I stood up in front of the audience and proudly shared what I produced, I was in quite a lot of pain, actually. So the start of that year, I'd had a really significant bike crash on my road bike at speed and had landed on my lower back really nastily. And whilst, I have subsequently been able to get back on the horse, as it were, it has taken me the best part of a year and a half of physio and progress, and then regressing in terms of pain and activity. And I'm now at the point where I can run, I can walk, but riding is still one of the things that is not comfortable. And I think for a long time in the last year or so, I haven't even wanted to look back at the book or talk about it, because it's full of riding, however happy and joyous those memories are, riding that I can't do, or at least have felt like I haven't been able to do. And I think I've avoided it simply because perhaps some listeners will know this well, and it might feel a bit cowardly to say it out loud, but it's the thought that by not knowing, you can convince yourself there's a chance that everything is fine. And actually, I did go mountain biking recently for the first time on a hilly day with my husband. We picked a small route and it wasn't pain-free, but I had forgotten just how much joy and freedom a bike gives, especially off-road. And I'm so glad that I picked the courage to get back on and have another go. I still haven't gone bikepacking. I know we were talking, Sarah, at the start of this, before we started recording, about how, I guess, back when I was researching and writing my first book, a good 4 years ago now, the idea of going bikepacking was easy. Any sort of adventure like that, I could just throw my kit into my bags, have my bivvy bag so I could feel like I could camp anywhere, and then just head off with a rough idea of what I wanted to do. And there's a kind of fearlessness and a kind of innocence to it that it's all so easy. And I remember being asked back then if I had any tips for people who were feeling a little bit unsure and worried about going out for the first time. And whilst I was able to give, some practical advice, it was harder to be empathetic, because I perhaps hadn't felt that worry in myself. And so whilst I was able to provide tips and ideas, it certainly was something that I hadn't had to grapple with up till then. Whereas I think this time around, I can very much say very honestly that I'm feeling like I'm right back at square one and needing to put all those tips and tricks that I shared back then, however glibly, to use, because that's the only way I'm going to be able to get out, is if I take it one step at a time, don't worry about failure, pick something that's close and local to build my confidence up. And I think at the end of the day, remember that getting out and enjoying my body moving through a landscape and feeling the sun on my face and getting a bit of an adrenaline, even if it's not a particularly technical trail. All of those things are better than sitting at home, however easy it can be or however safe it might feel.
Thank you so much for sharing that, because there's a couple of things that you talked about there, or a couple of words that really sort of jumped out at me. And one of them was around sort of confidence, having the confidence to go out and after your bike crash, that must have really sort of impacted your confidence. And so I'd love to hear more about building that back up, the recovery, both sort of mental and physical, and maybe just dealing with how you dealt with those struggles, and I suppose what you've learned from that experience.
I'd probably say the biggest learning curve was knowing that in the past I've ridden mostly solo and I've liked my own company. Not that I didn't ride with other people, but I certainly am somebody who's quite introverted, and I recharge my batteries by being alone in nature, and I don't necessarily need other people to help provide that for me. But I think one thing that the injury has meant is that I have slowed down more and reached out to people that I wouldn't necessarily have done. And it's that connection and network with my friends and family and new friends that I've gained, where sometimes that little bit of vulnerability where you say to them, hi there, I know we've been chatting on Instagram, or you're my Strava friend, and we've liked each other's routes for like the last year, but actually I can see you like the same sort of things me. I'm really struggling right now, and I'd really appreciate just a friendly face and someone to come ride with me that holds me to a little bit of accountability. Not so much that it's too threatening, but to know that I've taken a step to arrange something, which anyone who's had or gone through cognitive behavioral therapy knows that that is the first mini step you can do, that even if you don't follow through on something you've arranged, the very act of arranging something gives you a little ping, a little rush of self-worth that you've put yourself first and thought about what you need and done baby steps to get there. So yeah, I've got a great group of people around me who have sort of, I guess, rallied to help, which is lovely.
Bike are you riding at the moment?
Oh, well, interesting. I am now riding a beautiful full suspension bike called a Santa Cruz Juliana, which actually is not the bike I rode for all 38 bikepacking routes that are included in the book. That wonderful canyon bike served its purpose, and actually I'm in the process of selling it. So there's a little plug if anyone wants a very reliable steed to get them round their first bikepacking routes. But it's got a bit more travel, which ironically I bought before the crash, which should allow me to do a little bit more technical riding in the Alps or in Scotland or the Lake District as well. I'm a bit more comfortable on longer days as well. So precious about it, and I haven't really been able to ride it much, that it's been lovely having a bit of time on Julie. Who doesn't name their bikes? Do you name your bike, Sarah?
I don't have a bike.
Oh, well, do you think you'd name a bike if you had one?
I think I would, because, well, I mean, I did do a big cycling trip from
that's what I thought, yeah.
But now I'm trying to remember, like, did I name my bike? Like, what did I call? I don't know.
There's someone who I follow in Bristol, Claire Sharp, who calls her bike, or her old bike, Brittany Gears, which I particularly liked as just a one to, bikes are a traveling companion, aren't they? They're someone that we rely on. And I felt really guilty getting a new bike, especially when the old one was still in the garage. Feels like you're cheating a bit, doesn't it? But then I get attached to inanimate objects quite easily, I guess.
I have to ask this because some of the answers have been like really funny. I'm not getting the sense that you've got like 10 or 15 bikes lying about the property, but like, how many bikes do you have?
Well, I feel like I'm pretty reserved, considering how much I, at least in the past, have ridden and written about riding. Compared to a lot of my family and friends, I feel like I'm pretty restrained on the bike front. I know that a lot of people would tell you the perfect bike number to have is like N+1, but I have my full sus mountain bike and then my road bike, and that's it. I would quite like to add a gravel bike to my stable, which interestingly, when I've I guess it's sort of like a personal segue, that's not the reason why I wrote the books, but certainly on social media and through the email that I've put in the front of the book, people have got in touch with me to share how much they've enjoyed the rides and to share pictures of sort of their trips, which has been really lovely to see people enjoying themselves on something you've created. But a lot of people have done the rides on gravel bikes because, you know, that is a lot of people who are getting into bikepacking. That seems to be the bike that people are getting because it does allow you to, I guess, do a little bit of both and isn't so geared towards the more technical side of off-road riding. And actually, whilst I was slogging around Wales on a full suspension bike, which is a lot heavier and sort of racking up 30 miles in a day, fully loaded with all my camping gear, felt like plenty of time, especially by, you know, Sarah wanted to squeeze in ice creams, castle visits, swimming in the river I came across. You know, you can't pack too much into a day. But then there are plenty of people who have ridden the routes who have bashed them out in one day because they're more into their mile crunching perhaps, or they look at it as a whole day, that if they don't have their camping stuff, they move quicker through the landscape. And, you know, each to their own. I don't think it would be for me, but I love seeing how people have taken the book as a springboard for creating their own adventures, whatever that might be. But the gravel bike really seems to be the bike that people are gravitating towards. And it does also make it interesting that a lot of the routes I've chosen, I've ridden on a mountain bike, but clearly are perfectly accessible to people on, you know, without suspension and with perhaps slightly less knobbly tires, which is lovely to see people giving them a go and proving that it can be done on almost any off-road bike as long as it's in working order. Although I'd caveat that with the fact that the routes are graded, and I probably wouldn't attempt to do one of the black graded routes on a gravel bike if I valued my comfort. But I guess it's all doable, which is lovely to see.
So Emma, I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about Wales. So I've been fortunate enough in 2022, I have to remember my dates now, I actually walked the Wales coast path, which was,
lovely.
you know, amazing, getting to see Wales, to visit all of the incredible beaches, you know, see different castles out there. I'd love just, I suppose, generally to hear more about your experience with Wales and what it was like researching it, and maybe for you to share some of the, you know, the magical places, the magical moments that you had in Wales.
Oh, lovely. Well, thanks, Sarah, because I could talk for hours and hours about Wales. I feel like I've now, in the sort of process of researching and riding, you know, I feel like I do know Wales well now. And that I feel like I'm a rather staunch defender of its, you know, its rich history, its culture and its landscape. And so I could talk, you know, ad nauseum about it. But I guess for me, it was probably, especially with my love of maps, probably the Welsh language, which was the thing that captured me the most. And that I think the more I researched, the more I realized that this country, you know, this country is just so fascinating, with layers and layers of meaning built up over thousands of years. And there's a wonderful, wonderful quote by Jan Morris, if you ever get a chance to read their writing, where it starts off like this: brooded over by mist, more often than swirled about by cloud, lies the damp, demanding and obsessively interesting country known by its own people, Cymru, and known to the rest of the world, if it is known at all, as Wales. And there's really something about it that, considering its size, Sarah, it just has everything. You know, you go riding there for even a couple of days and you could experience the craggy mountains of Eryri in Snowdonia. You'd get the deep glaciated valleys. You've got moorland, you've got peat bogs, you've even got a limestone pavement a bit like you get in Yorkshire, but in pockets in Wales where you're least expecting it. You've got so much coastline, just like you mentioned there, although sadly a lot of it is not accessible on bikes, but there's a wonderful section on the Pembrokeshire National Park on the coast, which is well worth exploring, and towards the north around Anglesey too. And so I think for me, it was understanding that Wales might be considered by a lot of people to be quite a harsh and brutal landscape to ride through, because I don't know about you, but when I think of Wales, I conjure up pictures of real sort of gnarly mountains with a lot of ascent and descent. But I think one of the things that was fun to do was to find more accessible routes that don't just necessarily mean that you're slogging through a bog for hours, but are accessible and don't have so much height gain that you feel like you're battling with the elements. I think there's got to be a point where bikepacking doesn't have to be type 2 fun, that it doesn't have to always be epic and long to be memorable. And so as I was researching, I definitely came across stories and, parts of Wales' history that really stood out to me. And I think probably the drovers, and I've talked at length about the drovers, but Sarah, I love them. These people, these men that were in charge of corralling lots of cattle and sheep and pigs and geese from one end of Wales to the other across the border into England to be sold. They're like the original cowboys, the pioneers as you were. And they weren't on bikes, of course. They were walking many miles. But these people needed to know the Welsh landscape sort of intimately and know where water was going to be, where it was safe to cross, where they might have to avoid, highway robbers and anyone that was out to I guess, get what was theirs. And they were the pioneers, the entrepreneurs of Wales, these men who carried large amounts of gold and coin for the farmers that they were sort of taking the livestock across the border for. Because of all that money that they had to sort of lug from one end of the country to the other, they were the ones that set up the original banks. And so if you ever look at Lloyd's Bank and the Black Horse, that was originally a drover's bank. And there would have been a black ox representing the oxen that they drove across. And it was only fairly recently that Lloyd's changed the ox into a horse. So it's when I sort of pass by that local branch, it's sort of weird to think that everything I know about Wales is permeated even into the high street when I walk to get my lunch. You've got the Romans who were creating their sort of roads through Wales, and even though they didn't manage to subdue this rather fierce country, they've left their mark in the sort of the form of San Helen Roman Road and the forts and the milestones that you might see. But I think it's the landscape, it's what's on the ground that really interests me, and you can see that when you look at maps about how the Welsh landscape has been woven into the maps for its language that I just love. And I know that the Welsh are so fiercely proud and protective of their language. I couldn't even believe when I was researching this that you didn't even get bilingual road signs until the 1960s. And there's this growing sort of call to protect and to even rediscover Welsh place names. And I bet you've probably been following along with the changes in the national parks, sort of reverting back to their original names, which I'm so glad we were able to put into the guidebook. So you've got Banau Brycheiniog, which is the Brecon Beacons, but what a name to hark back to with everything it tells you about the king of the Bretons at the time. And you've also got Eryri, Snowdonia, which doesn't take much to say, but has a whole host of meaning behind it, which has been, I guess, developed over hundreds of years. And I guess for me, if there's a lot of place names, there's a lot of history. And so I tried to squeeze in as much as I could about how the Welsh language is so woven into an understanding of Welsh culture, Welsh history. There's such a connection, so that when you're riding through Wales, you would be useful to know that when you're passing somewhere that says Raida on a map, that you know that that's likely to be a waterfall, and that when you're coming across a linn, that's going to be a lake. And when you see the pont start of a name, it might have its Latin connotations too, but you know, a bridge is going to be there, which if you're bikepacking is always pretty useful. And so even knowing some of this basic vocabulary, I feel really enhanced my understanding and experience of my surroundings when I was on a ride. And that I feel that everyone who rides in Wales, without wanting to ram it down everyone's throats, I feel like even knowing a little bit can go so far to having a better understanding of such a complex and magical place.
When people finish adventures, they can have or deal with something called like the adventure blues. And I was just wondering, you know, with the completion of your project, of your book, Bikepacking Wales, sharing these incredible 18 routes, do you get like the book blues, or is it almost like a relief that you can close the book and sort of move on to the next thing?
I certainly felt that with Bikepacking England. It was certainly the case that I'd been working so intensely on it that I was at a loss of what to do with myself when I finished, because of the amount of free time that I certainly had opened up in front of me. And ironically, cycling possibly wasn't the first thing I wanted to do, because I had slept, eaten, you know, breathed that for the last year. And I guess I probably did more, filled that void with walking, went mushroom foraging for the first time, and a lot of wild swimming, just to, maybe ring the changes. And perhaps in Bikepacking Wales, the back injury coincided with, you know, roughly finishing it all. So I think possibly that was quite compounded the feelings of the adventure blues, because not only had a big project finished, but then I didn't have the ordinary normal outlets that I have relied upon to see me through. So that was a particularly hard time. But like I mentioned earlier in our chat, that, you know, friends and family have stepped in and helped in that regard, and things are a lot better now. But I'm getting itchy feet. Scotland's already been done by my lovely friend Marcus Stitz. If anyone wants to head north and get his guidebook, I'd thoroughly recommend it. Him and I have had long chats about the nature of route creation and what we get out of it and what we want to put in. So I'd really recommend that. But I've been looking across the Atlantic to Ireland, which could be possible, but their rights of way access, if we think ours are bad, is a whole other kettle of fish. It's not good. So there's definitely one for the future to think about. But for now, I think it's good to perhaps take a breather and just focus on riding without an agenda. I know people who have their hobbies and their jobs linked. If maybe you're a photographer in the outdoors and you have to carve out time to enjoy your hobby where it's not for a specific assignment or a paid job. I think it's the same for me. Now that my back is less painful and I've been able to find ways to move comfortably, that I want to perhaps experience again what it's like to ride purely for pleasure with no agenda, however much it didn't really impact my riding at the time. There is always that little niggling, voice in the back of your head says, "Oh, just a little bit more. That would be really good for the book." And a selfish part of me is glad to at least not have to think about that for a little bit longer. But if I'm honest with you, Sarah, I loved it. So I'm sure I'm going to do everything I can to write another one in the future, but not for a while.
I mean, massive congratulations on the book, Bikepacking Wales, another incredible addition for people to read, to help them go exploring. And Emma, where are you most active on social media? Where can people find more information about you and your books?
Best to probably head over to Instagram. My account there is emma.outdoors. You can reach out, ask questions. And I love seeing videos and photos you've posted of your own routes that you've perhaps been inspired to do from some of the routes in my books. I'm occasionally active on Twitter, Emma _outdoors, but not so much on Facebook. So I'd plug for Instagram.
And Emma, I'd love for you to have the final words of advice, final words of wisdom for other women out there who want to get into bike packing, who love bike packing, who love the outdoors. Apart from just do it, what advice would you like to share?
I'd always say start off small. That's always an interesting bit of advice to give. I know people say dream big, put yourself out there. I think if this year has taught me anything, small steps, build your confidence, find a friend who's happy to ride for 5 miles and then throw a bivy bag under a tree with a nice viewpoint and have a cup of tea with you. Stay in a pub. Don't worry if you feel like you're cheating. There's no such thing as cheating. Bike packing at the end of the day is just getting out on your bike and having an adventure, and you can make it whatever you want it to be. I'd say for Wales, one of the best ways to get in, I'd really recommend the bare bones bikepacking events, especially their 3-day Welsh ride thing that happens in the summer, which is a really good way to explore Wales, but perhaps in a more sort of group orientated and supported way. Sisters in the Wild offer lots of supported bikepacking trips that I'd really recommend too. And then there's also the guidebooks, which, being a guidebook writer, I have to plug. I'm really excited by a couple that are coming out or have just come out recently, which I think a lot of listeners might be interested in. There's the new Wild Swimming Walks guidebook set in Eryri by Emma Marshall, which I have got myself down to get one of the pre-orders about. I'm really excited about that one. There's the stand-up paddleboarding in the Lake District, Jo Mosley's second book, which I'm thrilled for her about. The lovely Catherine Moore, that lots of you might know, has been commissioned to write Gravel Ride Southwest, which is a new series by Vertebit, which I wish her the best with. It's going to be brilliant. And then just on a personal note, Helen Moore has brought out a biography of the outdoor pioneer Ethel Haythornthwaite, which looks like it's going to be a real treat as well. So lots of women writers writing about awesome things and fantastic outdoor women of the past. So lots to sink your teeth into and get inspired, really.
Emma, thank you so much for coming back on the Tough Girl Podcast Extra. As always, it's always been incredible to speak to you, and thank you again for all your hard work and effort that you've put into creating this incredible guidebook, Bikepacking Wales. And I'm excited to see and to follow along with your future adventures and challenges.
Oh, thanks, Sarah. I really appreciated it. Lovely to chat with you as always.
Hey tribe, I really hope you enjoyed that episode with Emma. What an absolute inspiration. Everything that we have talked about today will be available in the show notes at toughgirlchallenges.com. So please do go and check it out. Just a reminder, we first spoke with Emma on September 9th, 2021. Absolutely fantastic episode. I'll just read a little bit of the bump. So Emma Kingston is an outdoor adventurer, author, teacher and self-confessed map geek who lives in Bristol, the UK's first designated cycling city. She has ridden, walked, swam and camped in the southwest for over 20 years. And her knowledge of the area is enviable. Specialising in mountain biking, she has travelled extensively around the rest of the UK, Europe and further afield in search of ever more flowing single track. Emma took up bikepacking when she realised it meant that she could stay out and ride her bike for longer, take the time to explore interesting places off route and eat an outrageous amount of ice cream. In the summer of 2021, she released her first book, Bikepacking England, which contains 20 great multi-day off-road routes around the country and proves that you don't have to go far to have a memorable adventure. The episodes of the Tough Girl podcast go live every Tuesday and Thursday at 7 a.m. UK time. So make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out. Now, if you're particularly interested in cyclists and cycling, then we do have a resources page on the website, toughgirlchallenges.com. Go there /resources, click on cyclists. And we have spoken to a whole host of cyclists, from Megan Hackney. She's a bike packer and writer, sharing more about her new book, Shifting Gears, coast to coast on the Trans Am bike race. We've spoken to Claire Wyatt, who's passionate about bicycle touring and sharing stories stories of kindness from around. She's currently cycling 16,000 kilometers around Australia. Tegan Phillips, adventure cyclist and cartoonist. She shares more about preparing for her second attempt at being the fastest woman to cycle from Cairo to Cape Town. We've spoken with Kate Strong, a 3-time cycling world record holder, high performance coach and climate advocate. In June 2023, Kate started a 3-month cycle on a bamboo bike around mainland Britain. We've also spoken to the youngest woman to cycle around the world. We've spoken to Lyle Wilcox. She's an ultra-endurance bike rider and racer who won the Trans Am bike race in 2016 and set the Tour de Vides women's course record on an individual time trial in 2015. Lyle in 2024 is going after the women's fastest women to cycle around the world record. I was going to the first woman to cycle around the world, which was Juliana Bering. Absolutely incredible story, well worth listening to. We've spoken to Vidangi. She was the youngest woman to cycle around the world. We've spoken to women who've done a tandem bike ride around the world. Absolutely incredible stories. So please do go and visit Tough Girl Challenges to find out more about the women who have cycled and shared their story on the Tough Girl podcast. We are coming up to the end of July, and on the 1st of August, I'm going to be releasing a solo Tough Girl podcast reflections episode where I'll be reflecting back on the past 6 months and also sharing more about my plans and what is happening with Tough Girl Challenges and the Tough Girl podcast over the coming 6 months. So that episode will be released on the 1st of August. The 4th of August will be the 9th year anniversary of the Tough Girl podcast, and we are going to be kicking that off with 4 episodes, an episode going live at 7 a.m, 11 a.m, 11, 12, 1 p.m, and 3 p.m. So loads of incredible women continuing to share their amazing adventures and challenges on the Tough Girl podcast. All that's left for me to say is, wherever you are, whatever you are doing, give it your all, give it 110%, get after it, go for it, believe in yourself because I believe in you. Take care, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.